When 30 British actors invaded Sicily, they didn't fire a single shot. They didn't storm a single beach. Yet their performance, delivered not on a London stage, but across the waters of the Mediterranean, would save 15,000 Allied lives and change the course of the Italian campaign forever. This is the story of Operation Barclay, one of the most audacious theatrical productions in military history, where the stage was the entire Mediterranean theater, where the audience was the German High Command, and where a single misstep could cost not just the show, but the invasion itself. July 1943. As Allied forces prepared for the largest amphibious assault since Gallipoli, a small team of actors, artists, and illusionists were writing a script that would determine whether those forces would face minimal resistance or a slaughter on the beaches. This is their story. Background. The strategic situation facing the Allies in early 1943 was both promising and perilous. North Africa had fallen. Rommel's Afrika Korps had been defeated at El Alamein and subsequently pushed back across Libya and Tunisia. By May 13, 1943, the last Axis forces in Africa surrendered. The Mediterranean southern coast belonged to the Allies. The question now was simple. Where next? Churchill and Roosevelt had already decided. Sicily. Operation Husky would be the largest amphibious operation yet attempted. 160,000 men in the initial assault, supported by 3,000 ships and 4,000 aircraft. The objective? Capture Sicily, knock Italy out of the war, and open a second front in Europe from the south. But there was a problem. A fatal, obvious problem. Sicily was the only logical next target. The island sat like a stepping stone between North Africa and mainland Italy. Any fool could see it, which meant German and Italian commanders could see it too. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, commander of German forces in the Mediterranean, had already begun reinforcing the island. By June 1943, Sicily's garrison stood at approximately 230,000 Italian troops and 40,000 German soldiers, including elements of the Hermann Göring Panzer Division and the elite 15th Panzer Grenadier Division. If the Germans expected the invasion at Sicily and concentrated their mobile reserves there, the beaches would run red with Allied blood. Lieutenant Colonel Dudley Clark understood this with crystal clarity. Clark was the architect of what would become known as the A-Force, a deception unit operating out of Cairo since 1941. His specialty was making the enemy see things that weren't there. Phantom armies, fake invasions, entire military operations conjured from thin air, canvas, and creative genius. By early 1943, Clark's organization had grown to include officers from intelligence, signals, camouflage, and surprisingly, the London Theatre District. Among his recruits was Major Geoffrey Barkas, a film director, Captain Jasper Maskelyne, a stage magician, Lieutenant Colonel David Strangeways, a master of military deception, and dozens of others, set designers, makeup artists, prop builders, special effects men. They were soldiers now, but their weapons were illusion, misdirection, and performance. Clark's mission was clear: convince the German High Command that the invasion would come anywhere but Sicily. The operation would be called Barclay, and it would require the performance of a lifetime. The deception plan had to account for every method the Germans used to gather intelligence: aerial reconnaissance, signal intercepts, spy networks, prisoner interrogations, even simple logic. Each had to be fooled independently. Each had to tell the same lie. The core of Operation Barclay rested on a simple premise: make the Germans believe two simultaneous invasions were coming. One to Greece, one to Sardinia. Make Sicily appear to be nothing more than a feint, a diversion to pull defenders away from the real targets. The script was written in March 1943. Now came the production. Act 1. The physical deception. In ports across Egypt and Libya, Clark's team began constructing an entire phantom invasion force. They built landing craft from canvas stretched over wooden frames. At a distance, or from the air, They were indistinguishable from real vessels. Hundreds of them appeared in North African harbors, clustered as if preparing for embarkation. In the desert outside Cairo, they constructed dummy tanks, artillery pieces, and supply dumps. Not crude replicas, perfect forgeries. Each tank was built to exact specifications, complete with fake track marks pressed into the sand to simulate movement. Royal engineers worked alongside theatrical set designers. The engineers ensured structural plausibility. The set designers ensured visual perfection. By April, aerial reconnaissance photographs showed German intelligence exactly what Clark wanted them to see: a massive buildup opposite the Greek coast. Act 2. The signal's deception. But physical props were only half the performance. The Germans were listening. Every radio transmission in the Mediterranean was being intercepted and analyzed. This is where the actors truly took the stage. Dozens of radio operators, trained not in Morse code but in character, began transmitting false signals across the Mediterranean. Each operator developed a unique fist, a distinctive rhythm and pattern to their transmissions. German signals intelligence relied on recognizing individual operators to track unit movements. These phantom operators created phantom units. The British 12th Army appeared in the wireless traffic, an entire army group that existed only in radio waves. Headquarters staff coordinated with divisions that weren't there. Supply officers requested equipment for troops who had never been recruited. Intelligence officers filed reports on terrain that would never be crossed. The transmissions had to be perfect. Too much traffic would seem suspicious. Too little would seem incomplete. Every message had to fit within the broader narrative of an invasion force preparing for Greece. Major Michael Crichton, a signals officer with theater experience, directed the radio operators like actors in a play. "You're not sending a message," he would tell them. "You're playing a character. That character has a routine, has habits, has bad days and good days. Make me believe in him." The Germans listened, and they believed. Act 3. The human deception. Intelligence networks in neutral countries, Turkey, Spain, Portugal, were fed carefully prepared misinformation through controlled double agents. One of the most critical was the network run by Agent Cheese, a double agent in Cairo whose reports to the German Abwehr were actually written by British intelligence. Through him, the Germans learned of troop movements toward Greece, of special cold weather equipment being issued to units, of Greek language courses being offered to soldiers. In London, other agents spread rumors through diplomatic channels. At parties, in clubs, in carefully orchestrated, careless conversations, hints were dropped. Greece, Sardinia, anywhere but Sicily. Lieutenant Colonel John Bevan, head of the London Controlling Section, coordinated what he called strategic deception. His team planted false documents, staged fake diplomatic meetings, even arranged for Greek currency to be printed in large quantities, ensuring German intelligence would notice. Every detail reinforced the narrative. By May 1943, the deception had multiple layers working in concert. But Clark knew the Germans were intelligent, experienced, deeply suspicious. They would look for confirmation. They would search for the one piece of evidence that couldn't be faked. They would look for a body. The crisis. On April 30th, 1943, a corpse washed ashore near Huelva, Spain. The body was that of a British Royal Marines officer, Major William Martin. Chained to his wrist was a briefcase containing highly classified documents, letters between senior British commanders discussing the upcoming invasion of Greece and Sardinia. One letter from Lieutenant General Archibald Nye to General Harold Alexander explicitly mentioned that Sicily was merely a cover story to deceive the Germans. Spanish authorities discovered the body. local fishermen recovered it, and within hours, Spanish intelligence, which worked closely with German intelligence, had photographed every document in that briefcase. The documents made their way to Berlin, to the Abwehr, to the desk of Admiral Wilhelm Canaris himself. The question was simple. Would they believe it? Major William Martin didn't exist. The body was that of Glyndwr Michael, a Welsh homeless man who had died from eating rat poison. The documents were forgeries, carefully aged and weathered. The entire operation, codenamed Mincemeat, was an elaborate theater production with a corpse as the leading man. But the Germans didn't know that. What they saw was a drowned British officer, his briefcase still secured, documents that appeared authentic, intelligence that confirmed what their other sources were already suggesting. Admiral Canaris studied the documents for days. He questioned them, tested them, examined them from every angle. The Abwehr's analysts noted that some details seemed almost too convenient. The letters were perhaps too explicit, too revealing. But aerial reconnaissance showed British forces massing opposite Greece. Radio intercepts confirmed an army group preparing for operations in the eastern Mediterranean. Agent networks reported the same story independently. The documents aligned with everything else German intelligence was seeing. On May 14, 1943, Admiral Canaris sent his assessment to Hitler's headquarters. The documents, he concluded, were genuine. The invasion would target Greece and Sardinia. Hitler agreed. The Führer immediately ordered reinforcements rushed to Greece. The 1st Panzer Division was pulled from France and sent to the Peloponnese. Coastal defenses were strengthened across the Aegean. Minefields were expanded. Artillery positions were reinforced. In Sardinia, the Italian Corpo d'Armata was brought up to full strength. German liaison officers arrived to coordinate the defense. And in Sicily was left with minimal reinforcement. The deception had worked beyond Clark's most optimistic projections. The Germans had not only believed the lie, they had acted on it. But now came the most dangerous phase, because maintaining a deception is far harder than creating one. As July approached and the actual invasion force gathered, the risk of discovery grew exponentially. Thousands of soldiers knew the real target. Every ship sailing toward Sicily was a potential leak. Every aircraft flying reconnaissance was a chance for the truth to emerge. In the final weeks before Operation Husky, Clark's team worked frantically to maintain the illusion. Additional dummy landing craft appeared near Greek-facing ports. Radio traffic intensified, suggesting an imminent invasion in the eastern Mediterranean. False weather reports were transmitted, indicating planning around Greek coastal conditions. The performance had to continue until the very last moment. On the night of July 9, 1943, the largest invasion fleet ever assembled in the Mediterranean sailed for Sicily. Over 2,500 ships carrying 160,000 men crossed from North Africa under cover of darkness. The German commanders in Sicily watched them come with a growing sense of dread, not because they were prepared, but because they had been looking the wrong way. The turning point. The Allied invasion fleet struck Sicily's southern and eastern coasts in the early hours of July 10, 1943. American forces under General George Patton landed along the Gulf of Gela. British and Canadian forces under General Bernard Montgomery hit the beaches between Syracuse and the Piceno Peninsula. The initial resistance was lighter than anyone had dared hope. Italian coastal divisions, undermanned and demoralized, surrendered in large numbers. German units were present, but not in the overwhelming strength that had been feared. The Hermann Göring Division did mount counterattacks at Gela, but without the concentrated mobile reserves that could have thrown the invasion back into the sea. because those reserves were in Greece and Sardinia, scattered across defensive positions that would never be attacked. In the first 48 hours, Allied forces established beachheads across 150 kilometers of coastline. The feared slaughter on the beaches never materialized. Casualties, while still significant, were far below the worst-case projections. Military analysts would later estimate that if German forces had been concentrated on Sicily instead of dispersed across the Mediterranean, Allied casualties in the first week could have exceeded 15,000 men. The actual cost was approximately 2,000 killed and 6,000 wounded, tragic numbers, but a fraction of what a fully prepared defense would have inflicted. Operation Barclay had saved lives, thousands of them. Back in Cairo, Dudley Clark and his team received the news with quiet satisfaction. There would be no medals for this operation, no public recognition. The nature of deception demanded secrecy, both to protect methods and to preserve the possibility of future operations. But they knew what they had accomplished. Through the summer of 1943, as Allied forces fought their way across Sicily, German commanders gradually realized they had been deceived. But by then, it was too late. The beachheads were secure, the island was falling, and the gateway to Italy stood open. Field Marshal Kesselring would later write in his memoirs about the masterful Allied deception that had misdirected German defenses. He never learned the full extent of how thoroughly he had been fooled. The phantom armies disappeared as quickly as they had appeared. Canvas landing craft were struck and stored. Dummy tanks were dismantled. Radio operators fell silent. Their characters retired from the performance. But the lessons learned would be applied again. Many of the techniques pioneered in Operation Barclay would be refined and expanded for the greatest deception operation of all time. Operation Fortitude, the elaborate scheme that would convince Hitler the D-Day landings would come at Pas-de-Calais instead of Normandy. Geoffrey Barkas would go on to design the camouflage and deception schemes used in the Italian campaign. David Strangeways would help plan the Phantom 1st U.S. Army group that Fortitude created. The actors, artists, and illusionists who had staged a fake invasion of Greece would stage an even more elaborate performance across the English Channel. They had learned that in modern warfare, perception could be as powerful as steel, that a well-crafted lie, delivered with perfect conviction, could achieve what divisions of soldiers could not. The cost of the Sicily campaign would ultimately reach over 20,000 Allied casualties by the time the island fell in August. But military historians agree that without the deception, the initial assault alone could have cost nearly that many lives. The men who stormed those beaches never knew that their survival had been purchased not with guns, but with props. Not with soldiers, but with actors. Resolution and Legacy Operation. Barclay remained classified for decades after the war. When the files were finally released in the 1970s, military historians recognized it as one of the most successful strategic deceptions in history. The operation demonstrated that modern intelligence gathering, for all its sophistication, remained vulnerable to carefully coordinated misinformation. Dudley Clark retired from the military with the rank of brigadier, his contributions largely unknown to the public. He died in 1974 just as the full story of his wartime deceptions was beginning to emerge. None of the participants received public recognition during their lifetimes. The nature of deception operations meant their successes had to remain secret. But within military intelligence communities, Operation Barclay became a case study in strategic deception, studied at staff colleges and intelligence schools around the world. The techniques developed, combining physical deception, signals intelligence manipulation, and human intelligence operations into a coordinated whole became standard doctrine for modern military deception. The actors who became soldiers, who traded scripts for signal codes and stages for strategy rooms, proved that in total war, every skill has value. That creativity and imagination, when applied with discipline and precision, can be as decisive as firepower. The 15,000 lives saved cannot be counted with perfect accuracy. Military analysis involves projections and estimates. But comparing casualty rates from similar operations, accounting for the strength of defenses that could have been present, the number is conservative, if anything. 15,000 men who went home to their families after the war. 15,000 futures that continued because 30 British actors, a film director, a stage magician, and a brilliant intelligence officer convinced the German High Command to look the wrong way at the critical moment. In the small village of Huelva, Spain, there is a gravestone for Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. It stands as a monument to the man who never existed, whose death was staged to save lives, whose secret has long since been revealed. Tourists visit it now, place flowers, take photographs. Few realize they're looking at a stage prop, the most important stage prop of the Second World War. The inscription reads simply, William Martin, born 29th of March 1907, died 24th of April 1943, beloved son, a dear brother, R.I.P. Every word a lie, every word a truth, a performance that never ended. Outro. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Stories of courage that came not from the battlefield, but from the sharp minds of men and women who understood that winning a war requires more than strength. It requires deception, creativity, and the willingness to stage the greatest performance of your life when lives hang in the balance. Subscribe to WWII Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life. Because every soldier who fought, every life that was saved, every victory that was won, they all deserve to be remembered.